In June 1967, Israeli paratroopers faced the deadliest mission of their lives. They had to capture a hill from the enemy, but it wasn't just any hill. It was covered with trenches, minefields, and concrete bunkers. Every corner could hide an enemy soldier. Every step forward could be their last. The fighting was close and confused. Units were cut off from each other. Dozens lost their lives in a matter of hours. But to the Israelis, this wasn't just another military objective. Jerusalem was a city divided by barbed wire and military fortifications, and Jordanian forces had just launched a strike on the Israeli side. The paratroopers knew that their homes, their families, everything they knew just might depend on this one small hill, because whoever held it would control the future of Jerusalem. This is the Battle of Ammunition Hill. The day after Israel was born, it was invaded by its neighbors. When the fighting stopped, there was no peace treaty, no permanent borders, just shaky armistice lines, and one of them ran straight through Jerusalem. Barbed wire, concrete walls, snipers watching from the other side. Israel controlled most of the city, but Jordan captured the Old City. The Jewish quarter had no Jews for the first time in centuries. Jews were close enough to see their holiest sites, but couldn't visit them. In the Arab village of Beit Safafa, a fence cut through the community. When there was a wedding, they'd gather by the fence where family members on the other side could offer their blessings. Over time, Jordan fortified its side with bunkers and trenches. Israel built homes with thick walls and high windows to protect civilians from snipers. Life went on like this for decades. But it was like living in a sandcastle, never knowing when the waves might wash everything away. And by the spring of 1967, the tide was coming in. In the Sinai, Egypt massed troops and cut off Israeli shipping. Syrian forces shelled communities from the north, and Jordan signed a defense pact with Egypt, putting Jerusalem in the crosshairs. Israel was threatened from every direction, so on June 5th, Israel struck Egypt first, convinced it might not get a second chance. Israeli leaders urged Jordan to stay out of the war. Instead, Jordan began shelling West Jerusalem, and troops moved into a UN-controlled demilitarized zone. Many feared a repeat of 1948, when the old city's Jewish quarter fell. Neighborhoods overrun, synagogues destroyed, families forced to flee their homes. If Israel couldn't repel the Jordanians, all of Jerusalem could fall. But as long as Jordanian forces held the high ground in northern Jerusalem, Israel couldn't maneuver inside the city. That's why everything depended on capturing Ammunition Hill. It was a heavily fortified military post that blocked Israel's northern approach into East Jerusalem. It anchored Jordan's entire defensive line, and capturing it seemed pretty much impossible. Heavy machine guns and mortars, 2 stretches of razor-sharp barbed wire with a minefield between them, a maze of trenches and bunkers filled with Jordanian legionnaires, ready to strike with an uphill advantage and the element of surprise. Then at the top of the hill stood the heavily fortified Jordanian command bunker, the boss level of this literal uphill battle. The mission fell to around 100 Israeli paratroopers. They expected around 60 Jordanian legionnaires defending the hill, but they'd soon face around 150 well-entrenched soldiers. Just after midnight, the paratroopers rode buses through the darkened streets of Jerusalem until they were a kilometer from the border. From there, they moved on foot. No lights, no talking, just the sound of boots on the ground. Around 2:30 in the morning, the battle began. Israeli spotlights suddenly lit up Jordanian positions. Israeli machine gun and mortar teams pummeled the bright targets for 30 minutes straight. Then, while the Jordanians were still recovering, a small group of paratroopers sprinted toward the first barbed wire fence carrying explosives. They blew a path through the first fence, but before they could clear the second fence, there was a miscommunication. The rest of the battalion thought they heard the signal to begin their charge, so they rushed into a trap of their own making. After they surged past the first fence, they had to cross a minefield. The Israeli strategy was simple. Run as fast as you can in a single file line. If the guy in front of you steps on a mine, jump over his body and keep running. It demanded tremendous grit, but it worked. Until the line suddenly stopped, blocked by the second fence that they thought had been destroyed. They were stuck in the open, trapped in a minefield under heavy Jordanian fire. A shout traveled down the line of soldiers that there was another fence still. It finally reached the commander of the reserve explosives team, who was waiting by the first fence. He sprinted across the minefield under fire and set his explosives under the second wire fence. He tried to attach the detonator. A Jordanian grenade flew toward him. It exploded a few meters away, but he kept working. Finally, he activated the detonator. The blast opened a gap in the second fence. The paratroopers rushed through and plunged into the Jordanian trench, escaping one danger by diving into another. Now the real fight was about to begin. Inside the trenches, the paths were narrow, the walls were high, sight lines were short, the air was thick with dust and smoke. Soldiers turned corners and ran straight into enemy positions. The Israeli strategy was for the guy at the front to lay down continuous fire as they advanced forward in a line. As soon as his magazine was empty, he'd switch with the second guy who'd take over the point position while he reloaded. But they quickly realized that the trenches were too narrow to swap places with their bulky equipment. They had to improvise. When the point man ran out of ammo, he lay down so the others could literally run over his body. The progress was slow and grueling. Units got separated from each other in the chaos. After hours of fighting, one platoon was down to only 7 soldiers without any commanding officers. They were out of grenades, almost out of ammo. They didn't know what to do. So they just sat with their wounded and waited. In another trench, a point man leaned his head past a bend, and a Jordanian soldier shot off the tip of his nose. He fell backward, knocking down the other men like dominoes. Weighed down by their heavy packs, it was difficult to get back up. They were completely exposed to a Jordanian charge. The point man, noseless and blinded by his own blood, somehow got to his feet and threw a grenade around the corner. Then he ran around the bend, firing his Uzi until no Jordanians remained in the path ahead. At one point, the soldiers had to get through a stretch of trench that was wide open to a Jordanian ambush from above. So the deputy commander ordered Private Eitan Nava to run along the top of the trench to protect the rest of the men. Everyone knew the order was most likely a death sentence, but Nava didn't hesitate. He bravely guarded his comrades, completely exposed until finally he was taken out by the Jordanians. His cover fire was crucial to allow the Israelis to advance. As dawn began to break, the paratroopers on Ammunition Hill were exhausted. Units were scattered. Ammunition was low. They'd been fighting in the dark for hours. Now, the early morning light revealed the wounded lying beside the dead. The Jordanian trench at the top of the hill still held strong. Each time the Israelis tried to push toward it, they were driven back by enemy fire. The hill still belonged to the Jordanians. But then, at exactly the right moment, reinforcements arrived. A team of engineers had finally cleared a path for Israeli tanks to roll in and join the fight. With a low rumble that shook the ground, the tanks slowly advanced up the hill. And that's when a lieutenant by the name of Yoav Tsuri saw his chance. Using the tanks as cover, he clambered out of his trench and shouted for everyone to charge forward up the hill. Following his lead, scattered survivors stepped out into the open. Some sprinted from tree to tree, from rock to rock, throwing themselves to the ground to fire before dashing forward again. But Yoav didn't duck or sprint. He stayed upright, moving steadily up the slope. As they neared the top of the hill, they broke into a charge against a volley of Jordanian bullets. They jumped over the trench to the other side and fired down into the Jordanians. The highest trench was finally taken, but the battle still wasn't over. To the left, another trench was packed with Jordanian legionnaires. Yoav ran to the edge and hurled a grenade inside. The explosion shook the trench. As he turned back, he realized he was hit. He wouldn't live to see the end of the battle. But his charge had done its job. They had captured the strongest Jordanian trench. Now the Israelis were closing in on the final Jordanian position in the upper corner of the hill. But Jordanian fire from a nearby bunker blocked any forward movement. One soldier volunteered to leave the trench and climb on top of the bunker to drop a grenade inside. The others warned him that it was a suicide mission, but he didn't listen. He climbed up the bunker, completely exposed, and threw in a grenade. After the blast, they realized the bunker had a side room where the Jordanians were sheltered, so the Israelis gathered more than 40 pounds of TNT and placed them against the wall of the bunker. The charge detonated, tearing apart the wall and the roof. The paratroopers threw grenades into the wreckage, then moved in, firing until there was no movement left in the rubble. With the bunker destroyed, the Israelis easily took out the remaining pockets of Jordanian resistance. After hours of vicious, close-range combat, the hill was now in Israeli hands. When the fighting finally stopped, the cost was clear. 36 Israeli paratroopers and 71 Jordanian legionnaires were killed in the battle. Before they left Ammunition Hill, the Israelis took the time to build a temporary memorial in honor of their fallen comrades. In a gesture of respect, they also buried the bodies of 17 Jordanian soldiers. They placed a sign over the grave saying, "Buried here are 17 brave Jordanian soldiers." Strategically, the battle changed everything. Capturing Ammunition Hill opened the northern access to East Jerusalem. Israel could now outflank the Jordanian positions. Within days, Israel took control of all of Jerusalem. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the barbed wire came down. The city was reunited. Hebrew voices filled the Jewish quarter. Jews were once again able to reach their holiest sites. Some danced, some prayed, some cried. Decades later, Israel and Jordan signed a peace treaty ending decades of war. And in 2012, something remarkable happened. Veterans who once fought each other on Ammunition Hill met again on the very same ground. They stood side by side, sharing their stories and honoring the fallen from both sides. Today, Ammunition Hill is a national memorial developed with the support of Jewish National Fund USA and its donors across the US. The trenches where the soldiers fought are still there, carefully preserved. It stands as a reminder that even the fiercest battles can one day give way to peace.